Well, joining me now to talk more about the UN Secretary General's visit is Nigeria's former ambassador to the United Nations in Switzerland. He was also a former deputy head of mission in Kyiv, Ambassador Joseph Ayalogo. Thank you for joining me on the program.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Welcome, Ambassador. Let's begin with the timing of the Secretary General's visit, coming right after his Europe tour, where he met with leaders in Turkey, Russia, and of course, Ukraine. How significant is his timing?
Well, I would say it's quite significant in the sense that the problem in Europe now, in Ukraine, is challenging not just Europe, but the whole world. And it's and Africa seems to be, even though it's not an African problem yet, Africa will be at the receiving end of some of the negative outcomes of that crisis. And it's quite interesting that the Secretary General chose to come our way, almost taking up from there, coming to Africa or West Africa. So I would say it's quite important.
And you know that during his visit to Senegal and to Niger, he highlighted the impact of the war in Ukraine in Africa. In Senegal, he talked about the triple crisis: food, energy, finance for the region and well beyond. How would you rate the UN's interventions in tackling these issues?
Well, through its various agencies, they have been doing their best, but the UN is in itself limited in what it can do. It tends to respond to some of these challenges. Take energy, for instance. There probably wouldn't have been a problem if not for the war, the crisis in Ukraine. Energy challenges have a life of their own, and it's either supply of crude oil or something else. But these are dealt at the multilateral economic levels and so on. It wouldn't be much of the UN in itself wouldn't do much to change it. But there are already mechanisms to deal with it. But the area that I would say that the UN has a role to play is handling the matters of security, because security impacts on all these issues, whether it's energy or food. Like what is happening in Ukraine, Ukraine is a food basket to the world. Now it cannot produce as much as it does or it did. That's giving rise to food concerns about food. And if there wasn't that crisis, or if there had been a way to deal with it much earlier than they're trying to do now, there would have been we wouldn't have, at least the challenge of food security would have been less, a bit less, much less, and the same thing with the other issues. So essentially, the UN has a limited scope to deal with some of these challenges, but with using some of the agencies that are related to the UN, they are doing quite a lot so far, or rather have done so well in the past, dealing with matters pertaining to food, energy, and humanitarian and economic issues.
I know perhaps one of the fallouts, and this is of the war in Ukraine, is really the funding. Some of the agencies have cried that the war in Ukraine has sort of been like an addition to all of the crises, the world is going through, be it Yemen, the Horn of Africa, and other parts of the world. He's on his way. We understand he'll be here this evening. Perhaps will be also reiterating the same issues. We understand he'll be first going to Maiduguri, a city that has experienced the worst of terrorism and insecurity in the country. What message could he bring in terms of raising hope in the hearts of many that the world has not forgotten about our security challenges in spite of what we're seeing in Ukraine? What should Nigeria be really looking forward to, in this visit by the UN chief?
Well, I think I don't. What the important thing is, what can he take away from Nigeria? Nigerian government should be able to, well, ask for continued support or effort to deal with our own works, whatever they can do to help us in dealing with our internal security challenges, which of course has implications on humanitarian issues, food issues, and so on. We have a lot of internally displaced persons, and we would definitely need some commitment from the UN on how to manage these the challenges of internal refugees and internally displaced persons. I think that the UN Secretary General's visit would, at the end of the day, would just try to reassure many countries, especially in West Africa, that issues of security or insecurity is important. So countries that are doing things that might undermine their internal security would take heed and begin to think twice think seriously on how to manage these issues, so that at least some of the challenges that lead to the outcomes of insecurity would be ameliorated at the onset, or even without these things happening at all. So that should be one of the outcomes for his takeaway and our own takeaway too. But we'll keep telling them of our challenges. They know a lot of it, and what inputs that can be made by the UN United Nations agencies.
But also flowing from what you just said, it really reminds me of what we've seen, the different series of coups in West Africa. And the question has been, yet he has not visited any of those countries. So many might wonder, what does that say about the UN's approach to crisis on the continent, even though, on the other hand, we have some analysts who say that even though this is, he was re-elected last year for another 5-year term, it probably looks like he spent longer, perhaps 10 years even, in that seat with all of the issues around the world.
Well, there are always issues around the world, and the Secretary General is not new to them. You remember that he was also the head of the refugee agency, the UN agency that deals with refugees. I don't know why he hasn't visited those countries where they had coups, but there are other means that have been going on in dealing with the coups in those countries. For instance, the ECOWAS has done quite a lot in managing the outcome of the coups in those countries. So it's possible that the Secretary General for now is satisfied with what is happening there, or there isn't much that his personal visit can do, especially as he has his representatives in those countries and so on. So that's maybe an attempt to explain why he hasn't gone there yet. But I'm sure his eyes are on what's going on in those countries. And anyway, once he's in West Africa, he will still get briefings from those countries about whatever those countries need for now. Usually, when the security, the UN Secretary General's attentions get focused when there is when there's a crisis that will require UN intervention, in which case there's negotiation that would generate need for having a peacekeeping force and so on. So nothing to fault him yet there. We all know that the UN as an institution has a limitation in dealing with the issues that they are challenged with. That is peace and security, economic development, human rights, and so on. But they try their best to do what they can with their limited resources and the limited authority they have in dealing with these challenges.
We'd like to thank you, former Deputy Head of Mission in Kyiv, Ambassador Joseph Ayalogo. Always a pleasure. Thank you for joining us on The World Today.
Thank you.